Welcome to Courage Class. I'm Dr. Lindsay Kwok Hugh, and each week I'm in conversation with our community's changemakers and trailblazers. Together, we explore the unspoken parts of our Asian and Western experiences, finding strength, growth, and healing that reflect who we truly are, not who we've been told to be. I'm so glad you're here. Class is now in session. If you've ever been curious about therapy, or maybe you've tried it before, but something just didn't feel quite right, you are not alone. Many of us wonder what therapy could look like if it truly recognized our lived experiences and took that into account. And that is why I am so excited for today's conversation with Dr. Ummul Kathawalla. She's a licensed clinical psychologist, professor, and researcher who specializes in culturally informed mental health care. And she's here to explain what exactly does that mean, why it matters for our community, and how it transforms the way we think about healing. And here's the really special part. Dr. Kathawalla doesn't just talk about it. She actually leads me through a culturally informed therapy session in real time, guiding me to some pretty powerful aha moments of my own. Now, quick note before we dive in this episode, you'll hear me mispronounce Dr. Kathawalla's practice name. I want to make sure I say it correctly here, Kiram Psychology Services, LLC. Let's take a listen now. I am deeply honored to welcome Dr. Ummul Kathawalla, a licensed clinical psychologist, esteemed assistant professor of clinical practice at Suffolk University, adjunct assistant professor at Boston University, and owner and psychologist at Kiram Psychology Services, LLC. My goodness. Her work is rooted in evidence-based approaches as well as cutting-edge research on how discrimination, life stress, and cultural context shape identity and well-being across marginalized communities. Dr. Kathawalla also serves as an advisor to Untitled Health, the first tech-based mental health platform created specifically for the Asian community, offering care that reflects our cultural experience. Since 2021, Untitled has impacted over 3 million people in our community. And here, she is responsible for guiding the clinical and scientific research programs and supports community outreach efforts, ensuring that Anissa's model remains informed by rigorous science and responsive to cultural needs. She's a widely published scholar with work ranging from culturally informed career development, identity integration among Muslim and immigrant populations, and the application of open science practices in culturally responsive psychology. Her scholarship is instrumental in shaping the evolving field of applied ethnic minority psychology, and her insights are transforming how mental health care honors cultural identity, values, and our lived realities. I have to say, well, when I was preparing for this, I so admire how your work really bridges academic rigor with culturally attuned empathy and care. And so for that, it is such a privilege and an honor to have you as our guest today. And I just want to thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be a part of this conversation, and I'm so glad to be here today.
Well, today we are talking about therapy that sees us and why cultural fit may be really important when it comes to mental health. I'd really love to set the stage for our listeners, and I'm always so curious, so fascinated how folks come into this work of culturally informed care. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to just share a little bit with us about your own life story and your path to becoming such an esteemed and accomplished individual as yourself in this field of mental health care.
Yeah, thank you. So I grew up in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, and as a South Asian, Indian, Sri Lankan Muslim living in, at the time, a really predominantly white Midwestern town, I often felt that I was navigating multiple worlds. And early on, I recognized that the context that I was living in shaped my experiences. And when I compared myself to other peers and other friends that I was making, I did feel different because no matter what environment I was in, I was a minority. It wasn't until I was in college or graduate school, though, when I reflected more about this and was more aware of the difference and how it influenced the way I came to think about identity and belonging, and thinking about how these differences I carry with me history and my own family stories and these silent rules that I inherited also from my family and the context I grew up in. And I saw more of a tension, and I felt a more tension within myself as well. And that sparked my interest in psychology, not just of the science of psychology, but also a way to understand and honor culture and lived experiences. My pathway to becoming a psychologist began in undergrad. So I went to Northwestern University and I majored in, they have a degree that's called Human Development and Psychological Services. I best describe it as an applied psychology. And during that time, I also was involved in research for intervention programs. And so that's got me into both applied psychology and the research side of things, which led me to then pursue my PhD in counseling psychology at the University of Minnesota. And I continued more clinical training at the Boston VA, Bedford VA, and Boston University. And after all that training, I finally got my first job, which you had mentioned. I'm at Suffolk University right now. And I founded my private practice, Karam Psychology Services LLC. And with my private practice, I offer services to adults, college students, couples, and even have a perinatal population. And people come through with a variety of concerns. And I see people right now, at least in Massachusetts and Minnesota. And I enjoy that work. I find that people of color, immigrants, and other marginalized community members are drawn to my profile. My profile speaks to being culturally informed and client centered in my approach. And I really value the folks that I get to work with.
Absolutely. That definitely comes through in your website and in interacting with you as well. And I thank you so much for sharing that, because I think that that's going to resonate with so many people that are listening right now. This notion of growing up and realizing that there were just differences between themselves and the larger population which they were growing up. Would you be willing to share your pathway to becoming an advisor of Anise Health? Like, I just think this is so fascinating. Utilizing tech and intersecting it with mental health, I just think is incredible. And you're sort of on the forefront of that.
I also agree. I think tech and the ways that it's going to fit in with our society and in the field of mental health is really interesting. And I also have a deep interest in learning more. I have to can't take credit though. The co-founders of Anise, they really are leading the charge, but I'm really glad to be a clinical advisor and a part of the team. So my involvement did start with Anise Health back in 2021. So right when they were kind of starting off, I was talking to a friend who was at Harvard Business School at the time and really talking about my desire and my interest in technology and mental health in this new space. And she then introduced me to one of her classmates, Alice, who was also at Harvard Business School at the time. And that's how I got involved with Anise at the start. So I got involved with helping with some research projects and working with some of the preliminary data that they had collected. And then I kept on getting more and more involved and became a clinical advisor. And I think that it's so interesting because I think that startups and these innovative platforms can be especially useful is that culturally responsive care, it's hard to be scaled. And me as one individual provider, I only can see so many clients in a day. And platforms like Anise, on the other hand, really helps connect people to culturally responsive care. And some graduate programs don't always integrate consistent training about culturally responsive approaches, and especially for Asian Americans or Asians in general.
Sure.
And Anise is really working to change that through their platform. So as a clinical advisor and researcher there, I've been involved with shaping their model and training of other clinicians and consulting over the choices that they've been making so that care is both grounded in data and culturally responsive. So it really helps to kind of expand and scale access.
Absolutely. It's really incredible. I think the proof is in the pudding, too. The fact that the organization, with your support, has impacted already 3 million. I mean, I think that number is probably a little dated at this point as well. So it's quite incredible. I'd love to talk a little bit more about your research and your work. I know that your research and work aims to move the field of applied ethnic minority psychology forward. And I'm just wondering, would you be willing to help define that? What exactly is applied ethnic minority psychology for our listeners?
Yeah. So applied ethnic minority psychology is really about taking what we know about the experiences of ethnic minority communities, how discrimination, life stress, and cultural context really shapes identity, well-being, mental health, and then applying that knowledge to actual practice
Mm,
and interventions. So it's not just about theory, but it's about translating research into real culturally informed interventions.
okay.
And for me, applied ethnic minority psychology really means building an evidence base that can help us design better and really more responsive clinical care for diverse communities.
Absolutely. My understanding of culture is, sometimes when I would work with teachers, I would say the word culturally responsive instructional practice. And immediately some teachers might think, well, it's about the holidays that the kids celebrate, or the books I have to read, or the family practices that I have to engage or know about. What I'm trying to get at for our listeners is culture just like the holiday?
Yeah. It's like,
Yeah.
what is culture,
What
right?
is culture?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I hear you. And I think that, like, if we were to, go on Google right now and
Yeah.
type in culture, it'll give us some definition
Yeah.
and different ways that people conceptualize culture in research. And research studies also shifts kind of from paper to paper. But one of the conceptualizations that I think resonate with me is that and these are the phrases that they use, is something called surface and deep culture. So surface culture might be things like language
Uh-huh.
or holidays and maybe certain terms and these nuance that maybe is a little bit more accessible. And those are important. I don't
Yeah.
want to say that those aren't, but then there's also deep culture, which is more like these kind of cultural nuance. I'm using the word culture, value nuance, or these kind of unsaid norms or belief structures, what's considered right or wrong, like things that are a little bit more harder to maybe verbalize, but are really infused in what people believe and what
Yeah.
they emphasize, like how they decide to prioritize their time, what they decide is more worthy of their time, for example. So, kind of thinking about culture in both aspects. Culture is not, even two people who identify the same way might not experience culture in the same way.
Why might it be important for a practitioner to take into consideration the cultural background or experiences of a client?
Hmm. So I guess thinking in my own research too,
Yeah.
I've looked at things like discrimination and life stress
Yeah.
and how it impacts mental health or even identity development for minority populations. And a lot of my work has focused on Muslims living in Western countries. So this is both like a Muslim's cultural experience of what it means to be Muslim, but also living then in a Western country, which has its own culture. And so I think about that there's just each being able to take into account an individualized treatment to really focus on each person's individualized experience is what I think is important to take into
Yeah.
account the
Yeah.
cultural context. And as I had just said, no two clients are the same. So even if folks share a same ethnic identity, really depending on their family context, the environment that they grew up in, their experience could be different.
Okay.
So, as a practitioner and a researcher, I try to really make space for that uniqueness
Mm,
instead of making assumptions and honor the client's lived experience in each of those contexts.
sure. No, that's incredibly helpful. So it's important to not go in with preconceived notions. It sounds like establishing and really
Hmm.
understanding your client's background and developing a relationship might be critical to any therapeutic relationship.
Yeah, yeah,
Perfect. Thank you.
exactly.
I'm wondering if we could transition into culturally informed care and how culturally informed care may differ from a traditional model. How do you define culturally informed care in the context of mental health?
So, in my definition, culturally informed care means taking into account each client's cultural context and how they experience that culture in relation to their mental health. So, for example, if someone may have grown up in a more traditional or conservative environment, even if they don't share those beliefs, that context really does still shape their experience and might even result in more shame or guilt or even conflict.
Okay.
Or another example where religion is central. If a South Asian Muslim client, for example, finds grounding in prayer, I may frame mindfulness or meditation practices in connection to more Islamic prayer or dua. So it's really about tailoring the intervention to the client's cultural and personal framework.
Okay. That's really helpful. How might that be different than a traditional model of therapy?
Well, when I think about traditional models, I really think that they kind of are, and this is a little generalized, but they kind of assume a one size fits all approach. And
Okay.
sometimes they also tend to be more highly manualized. So this is a generalization again, but traditional models of therapy tend to maybe rely heavily on the importance of independence or self sufficiency. And that can feel really out of step sometimes if someone's cultural values really more emphasize family or community. And so culturally informed care then, right, is a more client-centered approach.
Okay.
And there's ways to adapt even worksheets that research has found to be really effective, but there's ways to adapt them to better resonate with clients, maybe even cultural language or values, or even providing examples that are more relevant. So I sometimes bring up feeling pressure from parents to pursue a certain type of field, whether that's medicine, and what comes up if you want to be
Sure.
more creative and pursue art.
Okay. It sounds like as a practitioner, adaptability is really critical. That listening ear is really critical as well. What might be some of the blind spots in a Western model of therapy when applied to Asian clients?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, one blind spot could be pathologizing cultural practices that are actually strengths. So, for example, caring for elders may be labeled as poor boundaries in a traditional model, when maybe for some Asian clients, it's actually really fulfilling and can be reciprocal.
Oh, yeah.
And so without that cultural attunement, something that's actually a meaningful part of someone's
Yeah.
life could be misunderstood as a problem.
Wow.
Or another blind spot could be something like missing a part of the problem. So, if a client was coming in with work stress or problems with a manager and might be internalizing these negative beliefs about themselves or their ability to work well, someone could focus more on, okay, let's try to talk about how you can communicate with your manager and what can you do to be more effective in the workplace. But actually, if you dig in further, maybe these problems are better conceptualized as discrimination, and the work context is actually filled with these microaggressions, and it's not actually about being more interpersonally effective with the manager, but it's more conceptualizing these interactions in terms of microaggressions. And the ways that you would address these problems really is different depending on how you conceptualize
Wow.
them.
Wow. That was so powerful. I mean, that just personally just resonated so strongly when you just talked about boundaries. And I've heard before you just have to cut off the toxic people in your life, to cut off the toxic family folk in your life. And it's not, I don't know, it's not that easy for someone who has been raised in a context where family is first, frankly. And so I would assume that there's nuances to that approach of setting boundaries, but also even talking about microaggressions in the workplace and how we approach that. Just like my own personal experience, the first time I ever was able to address that head on was when I started working with my own culturally attuned clinician, and to be able to frame a workplace interaction and thinking about it from the lens of discrimination, it was a very healing experience for
Yeah.
me. So anyways, I really appreciate you sharing that. I feel like
Yeah.
that's going to help a lot of people. I would love to move into why this might matter for
Mm.
our community, for Asian communities, and demystify the stigma around seeking care and really make the case for culturally informed care. I'm curious to know, in your own experience, what kinds of cultural nuances do you see your Asian clients bring into your office that your other clients may not bring?
Mm-hmm. First, what comes to mind is intergenerational expectations feel really big. So, beliefs being the good child or needing to honor parent sacrifices for moving to the US, or maybe even carrying weight of providing for your family or giving back to the family. And so those stand out. Or even beliefs like don't be a burden or emotions are weak. Those are things that stand out. And then other cultural nuances is especially bicultural stress. So navigating different identities at home or in public or different identities with certain contexts. So when I think about even myself, my own American and South Asian identities really bring with them different values, and sometimes they are in conflict. Right now, I live in Massachusetts for me and my husband's career, but I also constantly feel this pull that we should be moving back to Minnesota to be closer to my parents, especially as they age, and feeling that conflict and pulling me into different directions sometimes.
Sure, absolutely. And you mentioned those stereotypical beliefs like emotions are for the weak.
Mm-hmm.
Another one, not being a burden to others. How do these stereotypical beliefs maybe discourage us from typically seeking help?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I feel like these beliefs often make people minimize or hide their struggles
Yeah.
and make people feel like therapy can feel selfish or even shameful. And it often happens that clients don't seek help until they've reached the breaking point because asking for support makes them maybe feel like they're a failure or that maybe they've even heard that problems should be kept within the family
Mm-hmm.
and that it's shameful to talk about it with someone else.
Yep.
But really, personally, I'm an advocate for therapy. And I try to, well, obviously, I'm an advocate for therapy being a psychologist and all, but I really try to take some of those stereotypical beliefs, try to lift them by saying things. I really believe that therapy can be helpful for everyone. And even if you're doing well and you're okay, therapy can help us process like the daily ups and downs of life.
Yeah.
And so trying to normalize therapy, like going to your PCP once a year, going to therapy bi-weekly or weekly can be like that.
Absolutely. Therapy has been just an incredible saving grace just in this household. So you have our full support in that.
Yeah.
Um, are there typical Western therapeutic ideas that misunderstand and even pathologize a cultural practice or scenario?
Yeah. So, I mean, another example that comes to mind, right, is like what I was even mentioning about where do I live, right? Is I think that living with extended family as an adult is might be seen in traditional therapy as like avoiding independence
Mm.
or avoiding kind of being a true adult. But in Asian families, it's actually normal and maybe even a supportive arrangement. And really mislabeling that can make a client feel unseen or misunderstood and maybe even make them not want to continue therapy with a provider that's not seeing their full lived experience.
In your experience, what happens when someone finally feels understood and receives the culturally attuned care that they've been seeking, but perhaps just never knew that they needed?
Hopefully, this will resonate with
Yeah.
you, but I often think
Yeah.
that it's a visible sense of relief that clients feel lighter, more grounded. They don't feel like they need to waste energy explaining or defending their cultural background. And instead, they can actually focus on the healing.
Yeah.
And, being fully seen for one's identity really builds, I think, confidence and resilience. And it helps someone navigate life's ups and downs from a more stronger sense of self.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's just a lot of this internal resilience get built. I feel like it's also important though that on this journey of therapy, it might not always feel good. That even with a
Uh,
culturally attuned therapist, there's sessions that are tough. It might bring up things that you've buried for a while. So always feeling relief or always feeling lighter is not the goal of each session,
mm.
but that is kind of the ultimate when you think back at the whole journey, that's what you're hoping for.
Yeah. So let's say, Ummul, that we get to this place of, okay, I want to find a culturally informed provider. So for the person who is really curious about that type of care, but unsure of where to start, what should they look for in a culturally competent provider?
Yeah. So, I guess to start, I just want to acknowledge that it's hard to find a therapist that takes your insurance, has availability, is culturally
Thank you for
competent,
saying that. Yes.
and that you connect with and feel heard. So, I understand that people sometimes feel daunted by this process, but the hope is, right, platforms like Anise Health are a great starting point. So, being able to maybe start there and go through their process. They do also accept certain insurances and have different financial packages. And then there's also Psychology Today, which is a popular place to search for therapists. And it lets you filter therapists by identity, religion, or speciality. So if you do want to find someone that's more like an ethnic match or religious match, you can do that way. And there's certain phrases maybe using the words culture or minority, that might at least kind of be a starting base through psychology today.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm
Mhm.
curious to know, I am a perennial people pleaser, trying really hard in therapy to work through that right now. And I am someone who will just stick with it. I will just keep doing it because I can't quit or I can't hurt that person's feelings. How does a person know if the provider is a good cultural fit and they should stay? Are there any questions we could maybe ask ourselves to assess even cultural fit?
Mhm. Mhm. So I guess there's some things that I feel like you can do from the onset,
Okay.
maybe even, and then these questions can still be relevant, I think, when you're working with someone. But I think about, like, especially during the consultation call, is trying to look for someone who's really open and curious and respectful about your culture. So doesn't not someone who claims to know everything about yours, but just really wanting to ask questions and doesn't feel shy or awkward about doing so. And then I actually think there's some specific questions that I'm asked actually by folks, and I think that I think are helpful to be asked. So, how do you think about culture in your work? Or what experience do you have with clients
Mm.
from my background? And I feel like a provider might not have all the answers, but a good provider will really welcome those questions and engage openly. So I think those are some things that come to mind. But I guess when you're in it, how do you kind of know? So I feel like my first thought is give therapy a chance, at least 4 to 6 sessions to see if it's a right fit. You might know a little sooner, but just give it a little time because it might be
Okay.
that things are bubbling up and you're not sure. But if it's just not fitting right and you're not feeling heard and the person's not really exploring and being respectful, or you're finding yourself like having to explain every single little thing because they're thinking about what you're saying only from one context and not trying to see it from your own, that doesn't mean that therapy is not right for you. It just not might not be the right therapist.
Okay.
And so I really invite folks to kind of, reach out and try someone different.
That's excellent. I feel like this is so tweetable right here. Like we need to make this into a social media post because those specific questions or even feelings, sometimes it's just hard to discern like the fit. But I think that your advice to give it maybe 4 to 6 sessions, maybe you might know before that, but just to give it a little bit of time. It's almost like dating to
Yeah.
start,
Dating
right?
without the pressure, I think.
Without the pressure. You're right. To just give it some time to really get to know that person. So excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. I would love to move into, if you're open to it, what a culturally informed therapy session might feel like working through a very small problem, not very small. Maybe this is not fair to frame it like, can we do this in like 5 to 10 minutes? Can we solve this? But this is a real life scenario that I have dealt with in therapy. But just to give our listeners a sense of what it might feel like, would you be open to that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, fantastic. So this is the scenario that I will share with listeners. I'm 45 years old, got to a point where I just was like, I am not going to sacrifice my well-being, my mental health, my physical health for other people. And so I mentioned it earlier, I've been just forever a people pleaser. I'm really wanting to step away specifically from my house. I really want to start reallocating my time into my career, but I'm struggling to say no. I just have this guilt. Like I feel like I'm supposed to. I feel like it's my responsibility. And I'm just trying to work through this judgment of you're not a good mom if you aren't fully present 1,000% of the time. Trying to work through the guilt of wanting to have and beef up sort of my career now at this point in my life. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
it's always, I feel, when we hit those parts of our life that something isn't serving us and we actually reckon with it, it can feel so discombobulating. And that's the place that the most change occurs. So the fact that you're able to name these things for yourself
Yeah.
and come into therapy and face these aspects that feel really heavy and uncertain, I think is
Yeah.
a great first step.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean it's been a process to even get to this place of saying that out loud that I don't want to be at home and 1,000% of the time and I'm tired and burnt out and I want to reallocate. So I guess boundaries are the hardest thing. Things just saying no.
Yeah.
I don't even know like where to
So I guess I'm kind of
start.
curious,
Yeah.
where does this come up? Where does things come up that you feel things are being asked of you that doesn't no longer serve you?
That's a great question. So I think the first thing that comes up, and I'm going to pull my husband into this, because even though he's not here, poor guy, I will say he in his defense, we've made a lot of headway in our own therapeutic context. And I think that we really started off in very traditional roles, traditional in the sense that I grew up seeing my mom do everything for the house, and she also worked. And then my dad was like full force career. That's the dynamic that has played out in my household. So I feel I'm supposed to manage all the kids' schedule. I feel I'm supposed to make all the lunches. I'm supposed to manage all the meals. That's my responsibility, but I'm drowning in that. And I don't
Yeah.
know what or how to, I don't know what to do or how to say.
And so, I think about, okay, I understand this pull
Yeah.
to want to be, okay, so what do I do? What should I do tomorrow to make this better?
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that we'll kind of brainstorm and maybe leave with some kind of tangible changes. But I feel a lot of what I'm hearing from you also is that you're feeling a shift,
Yeah.
that what you saw and what
Yes.
you experienced doesn't feel like that's resonating with you.
Yes.
And I want to better understand this shift for yourself.
Yeah.
And so this shift of wanting to say no or shift of wanting to pursue something more,
Yep.
why is this feeling so important to you?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, my mom never ever did anything for herself. She never complained. And part of me really believes that that was, that's how her mom was. And, all my previous generations were. You asked me,
What's driving you
what's
for these
driving me?
changes?
There is just this internal sort of pull that there's more. I love my family. I love my children, but that there's just more for me outside. I want something for myself. And that is something I have never considered, or just I feel so guilty in saying that. I feel guilty just wanting more.
Yeah.
But I want it. And I'm scared. I feel guilty.
So what I'm noting, right, which is I asked this question because I think that the other part of the voice, right, the narrative in which you grew up in, the narrative that's kind of louder is this part that's like, you shouldn't be doing this.
Yes.
Your responsibility is to your kids.
Yes.
This isn't what a mom does.
Yes.
That's what you're supposed to do, right?
But isn't it?
And
Is it?
I mean, look, let's not put any judgment on whether that should
Okay.
or shouldn't be, but that's what I'm hearing, that voice is loud for you. And even when I ask the question of why do you want something different, it's hard to fully listen to that voice and hear because the other part bleeds in. Yeah, I want this, but I'm actually guilty, and it gets pulled. And I'm just sitting with that even as we try to just put aside that other pull, that voice is so loud, it's hard to hear the part that makes you want something different.
Yes. Yes. I'm not going to have a moment on that. You're going to make me have a moment on this. It is. It's really loud. And my mom did it beautifully, seamlessly, like never complained about it. And so I'm like,
and that's the narrative also.
Okay, wait. You're going to make me cry.
So what I had said, right?
Yeah.
I think sitting with this, I know we only have brief time in our mini therapy session right now, but I feel like sitting with this knowledge of how this other voice is so loud. And I'm not trying to say that other voice is true or not true, or it's just a voice that you carry with you from how you grew up, the environment that you're in. And that voice is there, but there's another voice that is wanting you to listen to it. And I'm just wondering about sitting and trying to listen to that other voice as a part of the exercise. As in between when we meet again in session to session of just sitting with and trying to journal about and listen to what that other voice is trying to tell you, and put the other guilt, shame that I should be, my mom did it perfectly, I shouldn't complain. Let's not even try to listen to that right now. It's just like, okay, you're there. And what's this other voice trying to tell me?
Hmm. Thank you. Thank you for that. Whoa. Like you
Yeah.
made me like almost cry. If I may just share with you
Yeah.
my experience of you, there was like zero judgment. The distinction between not judging any of the narratives in my head actually was incredibly, like, it really resonated with me. I felt, because I came to you and I was like, I had so much judgment. I'm not supposed to be feeling this way. Like, I'm not supposed to want to drop the ball. Um, but I want to drop the ball, you know, and I don't want to throw it back at anybody in my house, you know, but I just want to drop it so that I can have time to pursue elsewhere. I just will selfishly say this is something that I feel like I run into a lot of women my age, my friend circle, or who are struggling with. And your approach to just not having any judgment, which to me feels like a very deeply ingrained cultural narrative for me. It's like my mom, it's Chinese culture.
Yeah.
You know, women are supposed to do this. Like,
Yeah, no, I hear you. I guess like to kind of explain, so like if we were doing like long-term work together, which I don't know how to like always integrate this,
Yes.
like the way that I think about things is like I start with it, like especially with how you presented right now, is like I don't even want to go into like testing whether your judgments are logical or not, or like get into that first. I actually want to ground you in like why this matters to you. And remind you like this is actually something that you need for yourself. And like I would also want to connect it eventually. This actually would serve your kids and your family. That like you're doing it. You are like eventually trying to get this whole picture that taking care of you is also taking care of modeling things for your children, being able to show up more as a mother, as a wife.
Yeah.
And this is something that you just want, and that's okay.
And that's okay.
And so really trying to like I would spend more time there. And then once we felt like you had bought what I was saying and you actually believed like, yes, I need this and this is valuable.
Yeah.
This is valuable on its own. Then I would go into more of the judgment and guilt and try to understand how these family expectations and culture would, because I feel like then it would be a little less sticky already because you have belief of why what you want to do is more valuable.
I see. You know, what I really felt from you when I started talking was just, you just wanted to listen. And it almost felt like you wanted to, and even the way you're describing it, just really establish this trust, this relationship. And the trust is coming from listening and just non-judgment. You kept doing this, you were shaking, and I was really sort of kind of paying attention to the way that you were just reacting to what I was sharing. And never during what I was sharing did I ever feel like there was a, and I have to be really honest with you, that has happened to me in sessions before. And I just felt really heard by you. And so I guess if we were a step back, if we were to go back and just talk generally about culturally informed care, it feels like just that establishment of trust and listening is really, it's not like you even brought anything in about Chinese people. I didn't hear anything about Chinese people in what we were saying.
Yeah. And I think that as we're talking about it, I think that especially early on in sessions, I really do like try to listen and I take things a lot slower. And I think that if there's ways that I still do feel like I don't need to say at some points, oh, I get what you're saying from an Asian perspective, because I get it.
Yeah.
So I can just assume that I get it and don't need to verbalize it and show that I'm listening and I hear you. There are times that I'm more verbal about I understand, or if someone feels, once they start trying to explain, I'm like, it's okay, I understand. Or, oh, this is what I understand. Is that what resonates with you? Maybe about certain cultural topics, but especially early on, listening is something that I really try to hear the person's experience. And then later I might be a little bit more like, I guess, pushing both of us to think about things differently.
Okay. I guess that's where that adaptability, sort of just listening to your client and and adapting to and being able to understand and know when to say, I get it, or just to step back and just to listen and to hear. I mean, you were really masterful, I think,
Mm.
of the way that you were engaging. And it's really interesting because we say the same thing to teachers as well. Like, it's really about establishing trust when you first get into the classroom and listening and observing and going with that flow, as opposed to coming in with sort of this preconceived agenda and we have to get through this model or this lesson plan. I didn't feel that way at all with you. And full disclosure, folks at home, I sent this to Ummul, this scenario ahead of time, but there was no agenda. I think I was even all over the place if I'm going to be critical of myself. I'm here and there. There's a lot that I felt like was going on, and you just listened and adapted, and I really felt like you understood. Here we are talking about culturally informed care, and it wasn't like you came in and you were like, well, Chinese people are like this, or Asian people are like this. Which, I don't know, maybe there's a listener out there who might think that that's what culturally informed care is, and maybe that's not the flavor for them, but really it's about listening. At least that's what I felt from you.
Yeah, and feeling heard.
And feeling heard and not judged for having certain thoughts. So, well, thank you for indulging me in that.
Yeah,
Sorry,
and I appreciate you being vulnerable and open about some kind of, lived experience for yourself. So
that was super powerful. Okay. Well, folks, we're going to talk about the path forward, if that's okay, and offer some hope. I'm curious to know from you, Ummul, what does healing look like that when it does include both cultural context and clinical care? How will we be living our lives differently?
yeah. So I guess healing really could look different for everyone. And I think that therapists themselves conceptualize healing differently too. But for me, healing means feeling more coherent across different aspects of life. So that's whether that's home, work, or relationships. Coherent, I mean really having a sense of alignment between your identity and the values you want to prioritize at each stage of life or at that specific stage of life.
Okay.
So that doesn't mean showing up in exactly the same way in every context or across time. And I mean, thinking about your journey too, right? Like what you cared about and valued at one point might be different than now at the stage your kids are in as well. So it's really about being authentic and grounded in each space and at each point in your journey.
Okay.
And I also think healing is really about being more comfortable with nuance or dialectics. So holding space that you can both crave independence and family connection. And those can actually fit together, or honoring that you can have both stability and some creativity, or balancing tradition and more maybe individuality. How does that all fit? And I guess along with that, I think about, and I know a lot of therapists talk about it, but I really think it's also about self-compassion. So being really honest with yourself about what's actually sustainable for you, and thinking about the energy and the time that you can realistically give for each area of your life, right? So even it's impossible to do everything perfectly, but I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Yes.
And so really when you're thinking about healing, and especially when it includes the cultural competence, it's really people can feel less fragmented, less torn between different worlds, and really feel more balanced and at peace with the life that they're building for themselves.
Balance and at peace. If we were all to seek out culturally informed care, I'd love to hear, how do you think this might shift or even disrupt generational cycles of silence, shame, and or suppression in our families and our communities? If you could take us into the future.
Let's go look there together.
Yes.
I mean, I think it would really mean breaking some of these cycles of silence and shame that exist, and instead passing down generation to generation more tools for resilience and openness of talking about emotions, openness of talking about struggle or dialectics that people face. And maybe even families then could talk more freely about emotions and differences instead of avoiding them. I think avoidance is really the barrier in a lot of cases. So maybe, with less of that over time, when we look into the future, we could maybe see a shift in how future generations understand what it means to even be Asian. Some of the values that we have deemed that are Asian and feel kind of keep us stuck. Maybe there's some movement there, and it can help us change what it means to live authentically and honor where we come from.
Yes, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for this conversation. I'm just really, again, I'm so grateful to you, Dr. Kathawalla. I want to make sure that folks know where to reach out to you if they're interested. If you have a website or some social media handles, of course, we're going to post it in the show notes and everywhere where we're advertising this. But would you be willing to share? How can folks get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can. I have a website for my private practice. It's called, again, Kiram Psychology Services LLC. And I bet if you Google it, you can find the website, and I guess they'll be linked as well. I do also have an Instagram account, and folks are welcome to email me, reach out if you have any questions or look for support.
And what sort of exciting projects do you have on the horizon? Is there anything that you would like to share with the community that you're working on?
Right now, I'm kind of keeping things status quo in the private practice world, but I am working to build a postpartum group with another physical therapist for moms after 6 months postpartum who want to connect and reconnect to their body and talk about parenting issues that come up. So a little bit outside of the Asian space, but I feel like also another community that a lot of times kind of gets lost, and especially after post the newborn phase.
Absolutely. I could have used that. That sounds wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that. I have to say, you have just done such a beautiful and articulate job of really breaking down what culturally informed care looks like, feels like, the questions that we should be asking. I think it's going to really help a lot. I have so many friends asking me just about therapy, just in general, and to be able to reference them to you, it's just a really powerful tool and experience to hear it directly from someone who practices it, lives it on a daily basis. So I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to you. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Courage Class. I hope today's conversation gave you a little encouragement and inspiration. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And for extra motivation, tools, and behind-the-scenes content, sign up for my newsletter. I'd love to share with you more there. See you next time.